up, guys? So this very first session we got to talk about pre-production. I'm going to go over my little tips and tricks that I like to get myself organized before recording. And to do that, I deal with scratch tracks, tempos, multiple tempos, time signatures, customizing my metronome, setting up markers. I get all that done before I actually try and record anything. Don't forget to check out my new album, The Dichotomy Paradox. Let's get started. As I'm writing new material, I make a point to immediately record scratch tracks and get them organized into the DAW I intend to use later in the studio. These scratch tracks will eventually be used as a guide during the final recording session. I also like to program a basic drum beat for a reference as well. The following example is from my song Through His Life. It's important to remember that this is supposed to be used as a writing tool. I don't spend time tweaking plugins or settings. In fact, my guitar is barely in tune half the time. I just spend my time getting the key parts I want in the session. Let's take a quick look at the intro of this song and see exactly what I'm talking about. Let's compare this to how the final recordings actually turned out. Before I can begin recording the scratch tracks, I have to decide the exact tempo I want to use. Some songs call for more than one tempo, like in this example from the song Last Medley. Take my life and lead the way. Life is too short, don't live. Okay, so I went from 65 to 155, which is technically a 25 BPM boost. Later, I'm going to do another 25 BPM boost. This adds just a nice, subtle, dynamic effect without getting too extreme. The important thing here is that we've dialed in the exact tempo I want to use later in the studio. Most of the time, it's pretty easy to change different time signatures in your DAW. In this example, we'll go from 6/4 to 4/4. Problems begin to arise when you're dealing with lots of time changes, especially odd meter sections. You'll realize real quick that it becomes very annoying to manually enter every single time change. And if you have to go back later, say to the intro, and change the time signature, the whole timeline can get screwed up. And if you're messing with MIDI, things can get out of sync really quick. So here's an example of what happens when you don't start on the right beat It's not lined up with the right time signature, and you have an accent on the metronome, which starts throwing the groove off. Let's take a listen. So of course, to fix this, you would just add all the time signatures that you needed. I find it easier to just not use the signatures in the first place. And I go ahead and let the section land on whatever beat it lands on. And then I go ahead and take the accent off of the metronome so I don't get tripped up while recording. Usually I'll just skip the DAW's metronome and go ahead and build my own software instrument click track. It's really easy to do. I'll just create a software instrument track and just add a drum sampler of my choice. You can use anything. Ultra Beat works really well. I can just grab a patch of my choice. Okay, and it gives me this grid. I can just clear it out and then add whatever I want. So in this example, let's do an 8th note groove. Okay, all I gotta do is just literally drag it to the timeline. Then I'll just place it wherever I want. I can loop it, make it as long as I need. And let's say that next section right there, I want a different metronome groove. I'll just open the sampler back up, restart the process essentially. Okay, let's do a quarter note groove. Same thing, I'm just going to drag it to the timeline. I can loop it to whatever length I need. And you just keep doing that all the way across your song. Of course, you can open it up in the piano roll. You can edit them, change the velocities, whatever you need to do. It's really that simple. Okay, so I'm going to give you kind of a long example, but it gives you a good feel of what I'm actually hearing while I'm recording. And this is off my title track, The Dichotomy Paradox. So at this point, I've dialed in my tempo or tempo changes. I've decided how I'm going to work with the metronome, how I'm going to mess around with time signatures. Everything's how I like it. I've put in my sections and I'm not going back. It's time to mark or label each section of the song. This way, visually, I can zoom out, look at the whole piece, and see where everything is. This is super important as the song and the arrangements get more and more complicated. Okay, so I'll go ahead and just mark everything. Let's see what that looks like zoomed out. So there you go. If I'm working with an engineer and I say, bring me into verse 1, he'll know exactly where that is. The other nice thing is I could add information like lyrics to that section. So if he's listening to me while I'm recording, he can read along and keep me in check, make sure I'm still actually singing the proper lyrics. Okay, another thing you could do is you could add a note to yourself. Maybe in the writing process, you didn't write an epic solo, but you want to later. Here's an example of the longest song off my album, which turned out to be like 16 minutes plus. And if we look at the marker list, you can see it's kind of ridiculous. So if I'm not super organized, this is just a nightmare to work on. So there you go. That's a quick look at my workflow. I do everything we just talked about before going to the studio, and I think it really helps and saves a lot of time. Next time I'm going to quick talk about room acoustics. I'm going to go over my heads, the tunings I use. I'm going to do a complete look at my entire drum set, exactly how I set it up, how I mic it up, everything. Don't forget to subscribe and also check out my website, thoughtsofmine.com. Thanks for watching.